Hello, chess enthusiasts. Welcome back to the Chess Ventura channel. In today's video, we will learn about the techniques and art of attacking from the world's best chess player, Magnus Carlsen. This game features Magnus Carlsen against Andrew Grogen, played in New York, United States, in 2016. Alright, let's get straight into the game. Here, Magnus is playing as white and Andrew Grogen as black. The game starts with a pawn move to e4, followed by black's response with e5. White develops the knight to f3, black brings out the knight to c6, and white moves the bishop to b5. In this opening, Magnus Carlsen chooses the Ruy Lopez. Black counters by playing the Morphy defense variation, advancing the pawn to a6 to attack the white light-squared bishop. The bishop retreats to a4, but black pushes the pawn to b5, attacking the bishop once more. The bishop then moves back to b3, and black develops the knight to f6, threatening white's central pawn. Carlsen sacrificed his central pawn and opted for a kingside castling. However, black declined to capture the pawn and instead moved the bishop to e7, clearing space for the king to castle short. So, why didn't black dare to capture the pawn on e4? If the knight captures the pawn, white can slide the rook to e1, attacking the knight and putting pressure on the d5 pawn. If black defends the knight with the d5 pawn, white can develop the knight to c3, increasing the pressure on black's knight and pawn. For instance, if black's knight captures white's knight, white can recapture with a pawn. This gives white control of a semi-open file and a quicker tempo in piece development. Meanwhile, black's king remains in the center of the board and hasn't had the chance to castle. This explains why black avoided capturing the pawns and instead moved the bishop to e7. Carlsen then shifted his rook to f1, and black followed by castling short. White advanced the a4 pawn, offering an exchange. Black declined by moving the bishop to b7. Carlsen continued with a pawn move to d3, strengthening the central pawn and opening the diagonal for the bishop. Black mirrored this move with a pawn to d6. Up to this point, the moves we've seen are standard in the Ruy Lopez Opening. This particular variation is known as the anti-Marshall variation, an extension of the Morphy defense. At this point, Magnus Carlsen began concentrating his attack on the king side by moving his knight to d2. The next goal was to maneuver the knight to a more strategic square g3. Black continued with a standard move, placing the rook on e8. White followed his plan, advancing the knight to f1. Black then moved the knight to d4, attacking the bishop and offering a knight exchange. The exchange was accepted. Black's knight captured white's, and black recaptured with a pawn. White then positioned the knight on g3. At this point, the best moves for black would have been pushing the c5 or d5 pawn. However, black made a mistake by moving the h-pawn to h6, possibly to prevent white's bishop from occupying g5. Magnus Carlsen immediately capitalized on this blunder by jumping his knight to f5. The knight's position here is incredibly strong, exerting pressure on the bishop, the g7 pawn, and the h6 pawn. It's important to note that this knight cannot be driven away by a pawn because the h6 pawn is vulnerable to capture by the knight. Additionally, white's dark-squared bishop could sacrifice itself in the next few moves to break through black's defense. Black then made a delayed move by advancing the pawn to c5. In this position, white could have immediately sacrificed the bishop by capturing the pawn, and after black recaptures with a pawn, the knight would then capture the pawn, completely dismantling black's defense. However, in the original game, Magnus Carlsen remained patient and refrained from rushing the sacrifice. He placed his queen on f3, preparing to reposition it to g3 after sacrificing the dark-squared bishop. It seems Carlsen wanted to ensure that his attack would decisively threaten the opponent's king. Once again, black blundered by moving the rook to c8. Perhaps the intention was to support a pawn push to c4, but this turned out to be a critical error, as it allowed Magnus Carlsen to unleash the attack he had been carefully planning. Before initiating the attack, Carlsen first opened the a-file by capturing the pawn with his pawn. This move ensured that his light-squared bishop wouldn't face any issues during the attack. The bishop on b3 played a crucial role by targeting the weak pawn on f7. After the pawn exchange, Carlsen launched his assault by sacrificing his bishop to capture the pawn. If black accepted the sacrifice by recapturing with the pawn, white's queen would move to g3, delivering a check. If the king moved to h8, the queen would deliver checkmate on g7. If the knight blocked the check, the queen would capture the knight. If the bishop blocked the check, white would continue with the knight capturing the pawn, delivering another check. After the king moved to g7, the knight would capture the pawn on f7, attacking both the queen and the bishop on g5. In any scenario, it would be nearly impossible for black to recover, especially against a player of Magnus Carlsen's caliber. For this reason, black didn't dare to accept the bishop sacrifice and instead advanced the pawn to g6, attacking the knight on f5. Carlsen responded by moving his rook to a7, targeting the light-squared bishop. If black attempted to capture the knight, white's queen would capture the pawn, intensifying the attack. In the actual game, black avoided capturing the knight and instead chose to protect the bishop with the rook. In response, Carlsen exchanged his knight for the bishop, delivering a check. Once again, his opponent made a fatal blunder by capturing the knight with the rook. In such a situation, capturing the knight with the queen would have been black's best option. This could have been followed by moving the bishop to g5, attacking the knight, and repositioning the king to g7 for added protection. White could then play a deflection tactic by capturing the bishop with the rook. After black's rook captured white's, white would push the pawn to e5, simultaneously attacking the knight and threatening the rook on b7. At this point, black's queen could no longer protect both pieces. After a pawn exchange, white's bishop would capture the knight, delivering a check. Black's queen would then be forced to capture the bishop, allowing white's queen to capture the rook. In the original game, under immense pressure, black made the fatal mistake of capturing the knight with the rook. Carlsen capitalized on this by moving his queen to capture the knight, threatening checkmate on the next move. Regardless of what black played, the checkmate was inevitable. Black attempted to delay with the rook capturing a pawn, but Magnus Carlsen ended the game decisively with his queen on g7, delivering checkmate. All right, chess enthusiasts, that was an exciting and highly instructive game played by Magnus Carlsen. I hope this video has provided you with some valuable insights and strategies to improve your own chess game. It's always a pleasure to break down such a high-level match and learn from the best. That's all for today's analysis. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the content, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more chess tips and game breakdowns. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the world of chess. Until next time, keep playing and keep improving.